Sarah managed to guide Mitchell through a service corridor that led to the clinic's kitchen area. The sounds of conflict were growing louder throughout the building, suggesting that multiple armed groups were now searching for them. Mitchell's mental clarity was improving, but he remained physically weak from whatever drugs had been administered during his captivity. "There's a delivery in trance," Mitchell whispered, pointing toward the rear of the kitchen. "I saw them bring supplies through there when I was lucid enough to observe." Sarah checked the door carefully before opening it. The delivery area was temporarily clear, but she could see tactical lights moving through the trees surrounding the clinic. Whatever was happening at the facility had attracted serious attention from people with military training and equipment. They moved quickly across the loading dock and into the wooded area beyond the clinic's immediate grounds. Sarah's car was parked nearly half a mile away, and reaching it would require avoiding multiple groups of armed searchers who clearly had orders to capture rather than protect Mitchell. As they moved through the darkness, Mitchell began explaining what had happened to him over the past several days. His account revealed the true scope of the conspiracy and why his photograph was worth so much to so many different parties. "I wasn't just photographing meetings," Mitchell explained as they paused behind a maintenance shed. "I documented a transaction, money changing hands between Minister Harrison and a man I later identified as a colonel in Russian military intelligence." "Money for what?" "Defense contracts." Harrison was providing advance information about British military procurement decisions, allowing Russian companies to submit more competitive bids through shell companies. Sarah understood the implications immediately. If foreign governments were manipulating British defense contracts, they could influence what weapons and equipment the military purchased. This gave them insight into British capabilities and potentially access to advanced technology through compromised suppliers. But that wasn't the worst part, Mitchell continued. The Russian colonel was acting as an intermediary for a larger group that includes intelligence operatives from multiple countries. China, Iran, North Korea, they were all buying different types of information through the same network. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Rather than individual spies or small cells, Mitchell had documented an international marketplace where British state secrets were sold to the highest bidders. The photograph he'd taken captured a transaction that proved the existence of this network and identified its key participants. "Where did you hide the photograph?" Mitchell looked around to orient himself before answering. "Windsor Castle. There's a spot in the guard quarters where I could access it during my duties without suspicion. The photograph is hidden inside a military manual that's part of the standard reference library." Sarah realized they needed to reach Windsor Castle before either the conspiracy members or MI5 agents could search Mitchell's hiding place. The photograph was the only evidence that could definitively prove the treason charges and protect Mitchell from being silenced permanently. Their movement through the woods was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the clinic from multiple directions. Powerful spotlights began sweeping the grounds, and Sarah could hear radio communications in several different languages. The facility was clearly under siege by competing groups who all wanted access to Mitchell and the information he possessed. "We need to reach my car," Sarah told Mitchell. "Once we're mobile, we can contact my superiors and arrange protection while we recover the photograph." Mitchell's condition had improved enough for him to move more quickly, but he was still affected by whatever drugs he'd been given. Sarah had to support him as they navigated through undergrowth and around obstacles, making their escape slower and more difficult than she would have preferred. A helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight probing the forest canopy. Sarah couldn't identify whether it belonged to British security services or the foreign operatives who were apparently also searching for Mitchell. The situation was rapidly becoming a multi-party confrontation with Mitchell as the prize everyone wanted to claim. They reached Sarah's vehicle just as armed figures emerged from the tree line behind them. Sarah started the engine immediately and accelerated away from the clinic, hoping to reach the main road before they could be intercepted by vehicles that were undoubtedly faster and better equipped than her standard police car. The drive toward Windsor Castle took nearly an hour through back roads that Sarah hoped would be less monitored than major highways. Mitchell used the time to provide more details about his investigation and the evidence he'd gathered beyond the crucial photograph. "I documented dozens of meetings over several months," he explained. The photograph showing the money exchange was just the most obvious evidence of criminal activity. There are records of defense contractors, intelligence briefings, and diplomatic communications all being sold through this network. Sarah understood that Mitchell's investigation had uncovered a systematic compromise of British national security that extended far beyond individual acts of espionage. The conspiracy included members of Parliament, senior civil servants, military officers, and private contractors who had turned state secrets into a profitable business enterprise. How many people do you think are involved? Dozens directly, maybe hundreds if you include everyone who's been compromised or recruited. The payments I saw weren't small amounts. We're talking about millions of pounds changing hands regularly. The scale of the corruption was almost beyond comprehension. If Mitchell's estimates were accurate, a significant portion of the British government's security apparatus had been infiltrated and compromised by foreign intelligence services working together rather than competing. As they approached Windsor Castle, Sarah began planning how to retrieve the photograph without alerting the castle's security systems or the various parties who were undoubtedly monitoring their movements. Mitchell's access to the guard quarters would normally allow him to enter without questions, but his status as a missing person complicated the situation. Can you reach your hiding place without going through main security checkpoints? Mitchell considered this carefully. There's a service entrance that guards use during shift changes. If we time it right, I might be able to enter during the confusion of people coming and going. Sarah decided to take the risk. The photograph was crucial evidence, and every hour they delayed gave the conspiracy more time to locate and destroy it. Once they had concrete proof of the treason, Sarah could contact her superiors and arrange proper protection for Mitchell while the evidence was processed through official channels. The service entrance Mitchell described was located away from the castle's main tourist areas and formal security positions. Several guards were indeed moving through the area as shifts changed, providing the cover Mitchell needed to enter the facility without attracting attention. Sarah waited in her car while Mitchell entered the castle. He promised to return within 30 minutes with the photograph, but Sarah was prepared to call for backup if he didn't reappear on schedule. The situation had moved far beyond normal police procedures, but she was committed to seeing it through to a proper resolution. 20 minutes passed before Sarah noticed vehicles approaching the castle grounds from multiple directions. The timing suggested that someone had tracked them to Windsor and was moving to prevent them from recovering the evidence. Sarah immediately called Mitchell's mobile phone to warn him, but the call went directly to voicemail. Sarah faced a critical decision. She could wait for Mitchell and hope he could retrieve the photograph before being captured, or she could enter the castle herself and attempt to assist him. Either choice involved significant risks, but abandoning Mitchell wasn't an option she was prepared to consider. She decided to enter through the same service entrance Mitchell had used. Her police credentials might provide some protection if she encountered castle security, and her knowledge of the case could help Mitchell if he was having difficulty locating the hidden photograph. The guard quarters were a maze of corridors and rooms that housed the personnel responsible for royal security. Mitchell's directions led Sarah to a library area where reference materials were stored for guards' use during their assignments. The atmosphere was tense, with several guards discussing reports of unusual activity around the castle grounds. Sarah found Mitchell in the library, frantically searching through military manuals for the photograph he'd hidden there. His efforts were complicated by the presence of other guards who were using the same space, forcing him to search discreetly to avoid attracting attention. "It's not here," Mitchell whispered urgently when Sarah approached. "Someone has already been through these materials. The manual where I hid the photograph is missing." Sarah felt her heart sink. If the photograph had already been discovered and removed, they'd lost the crucial evidence needed to expose the conspiracy. Without it, Mitchell's testimony alone wouldn't be sufficient to prosecute the high-level figures involved in the treason. "Are you certain this is the right location?" "Absolutely. I hid it in a manual on ceremonial protocols that's rarely accessed. Someone would have had to search systematically through every book to find it." This suggested that whoever had taken the photograph knew exactly what they were looking for and where Mitchell might have hidden it. Either the conspiracy had sources inside the castle security apparatus, or MI5's investigation was more compromised than Agent Harrison had admitted. Their search was interrupted by the arrival of castle security personnel who clearly weren't part of the normal guard rotation. These men moved with military precision and carried equipment that suggested they were prepared for significant resistance. Sarah immediately identified herself as a police officer, but their response made it clear they weren't interested in civilian law enforcement authority. Detective Inspector Chun, one of them said, "You and Guardsman Mitchell need to come with us immediately. There are national security concerns that require your cooperation." Sarah demanded to see proper identification and legal authority for their actions, but the security team's leader simply repeated that they were operating under emergency protocols that superseded normal procedures. Mitchell was clearly frightened by the prospect of being taken into custody again, especially by people whose authority and intentions weren't clear. The confrontation was resolved by the arrival of Agent Harrison and his MI5 colleagues, who apparently had been tracking Sarah's movements throughout the evening. Harrison's expression was grim as he assessed the situation in the castle library. "The photograph you're looking for was recovered 2 hours ago," Harrison informed them. "We have it secured as evidence in our investigation." Sarah felt both relief and suspicion. "If you already have the evidence, why are all these people still searching for Mitchell?" "Because they don't know we have it. The conspiracy members think Mitchell still has the photograph, which makes him a target for elimination. We need to maintain that fiction while we complete our operation to arrest everyone involved." The explanation made tactical sense, but left Sarah concerned about Mitchell's safety. If MI5 was using him as bait to draw out remaining conspiracy members, his life was still in danger from people who would kill to protect their secrets. Harrison's briefing revealed that the intelligence operation was entering its final phase. The photograph Mitchell had taken provided sufficient evidence to arrest Minister Harrison and several other government officials, while international cooperation was being coordinated to simultaneously arrest foreign operatives in multiple countries. What happens to Mitchell during these arrests? He'll be placed in protective custody until all conspiracy members are secured. His testimony will be crucial for prosecuting the cases, but he needs to survive long enough to provide it. Sarah understood the logic, but remained skeptical about Mitchell's treatment by the security services. In her experience, intelligence operations prioritized mission success over individual welfare, and protective custody sometimes became indefinite detention if it served operational purposes. The resolution came more quickly than anyone expected. While they were discussing Mitchell's future, tactical teams throughout London and other cities were simultaneously arresting conspiracy members based on evidence from the photograph, and supporting intelligence gathered over months of investigation. Minister Harrison was taken into custody at his Whitehall office, along with several colleagues who had been selling defense information. Sir Marcus Whitfield was arrested at his estate, where investigators found extensive records of payments to government officials and communications with foreign intelligence services. Dr. Foster's clinic was raided, revealing a sophisticated operation designed to interrogate and control people who possessed sensitive information. The facility had been used to drug and manipulate multiple victims over several years, with Foster's medical credentials providing cover for activities that amounted to torture and kidnapping. Within 6 hours, more than 30 people had been arrested across Britain on charges ranging from espionage to treason. International coordination resulted in additional arrests in Russia, China, and several other countries where foreign operatives had been receiving British state secrets through the conspiracy network. Mitchell's photograph had indeed captured evidence that exposed the most extensive espionage conspiracy in British history. The image showed Minister Harrison receiving a briefcase containing £2 million from a Russian colonel, with the exchange taking place in a location where both men believed they were safe from surveillance. The case's resolution brought mixed emotions for Sarah. Mitchell was safe and would receive medical treatment for the trauma he'd experienced during his captivity. The conspiracy had been exposed, and its members would face justice for their crimes against national security. However, Sarah remained troubled by the methods used by both sides during the investigation. Mitchell had been drugged and held against his will by the conspiracy, but he'd also been manipulated and endangered by the intelligence services who recruited him for surveillance work without adequate protection. The broader implications of the case were staggering. If such an extensive spy network could operate undetected for years within the British government, It raised serious questions about security procedures and oversight of people with access to classified information. During his recovery, Mitchell provided detailed testimony about his experiences and the investigation that had led to his recruitment by MI5. His account revealed the psychological pressure faced by someone who discovered treason but couldn't report it through normal channels without endangering his own life. "I knew what I was seeing was wrong," Mitchell explained to Sarah during one of her visits to the secure medical facility where he was recovering. "But I also knew that reporting it through my chain of command might mean reporting it to people who were part of the conspiracy." Sarah understood Mitchell's dilemma. He'd been placed in an impossible situation where his duty as a soldier conflicted with his safety as an individual who possessed dangerous knowledge. His decision to document the conspiracy and work with intelligence services had ultimately exposed the treason, but at tremendous personal cost. The trials that followed Mitchell's rescue were conducted largely in secret due to the sensitive nature of the evidence and the ongoing intelligence operations in multiple countries. However, the convictions were decisive. Minister Harrison received a life sentence for treason, while other conspiracy members faced lengthy prison terms for espionage and corruption. Sir Marcus Whitfield was revealed to have been the conspiracy's chief coordinator, managing relationships with foreign intelligence services and distributing payments to corrupted government officials. His business empire had been built on profits from selling British state secrets, with legitimate enterprises serving as cover for espionage activities. Dr. Foster received significant prison time for her role in kidnapping and drugging Mitchell and other victims. Her medical practice had been a front for activities that violated every principle of medical ethics and professional responsibility. The international scope of the conspiracy resulted in diplomatic consequences that extended far beyond the criminal prosecutions. Several countries had their diplomatic personnel expelled from Britain, while intelligence sharing agreements were suspended pending investigation of how foreign services had penetrated British security so extensively. For Sarah, the case represented both a professional success and a personal lesson about the complexities of investigating crimes that intersected with national security. Her determination to find Mitchell had led to exposing a massive conspiracy, but it had also revealed the moral ambiguities involved when law enforcement and intelligence services pursued the same objectives through different methods. Mitchell's recovery was slow but steady. The drugs he'd been given had caused temporary memory problems and physical weakness, but medical treatment gradually restored his health. More challenging was the psychological trauma of learning that people he'd trusted with his life had been selling state secrets to foreign enemies. The case officially closed 6 months after Mitchell's rescue, with all major conspiracy members convicted and sentenced. But Sarah knew that the underlying vulnerabilities that had allowed such extensive infiltration of the government would require years to address completely. Mitchell chose to leave military service after his recovery, deciding that his experiences had made continued work in security roles too psychologically difficult. He provided testimony that helped convict all the major conspiracy figures, but the process of reliving his captivity and drugging was extremely difficult. Sarah remained in contact with Mitchell during his transition to civilian life, helping him navigate the psychological and practical challenges of rebuilding after trauma. Their shared experience during the investigation created a bond that went beyond professional relationships, though both understood that Mitchell needed space to heal from what he'd endured. The broader lessons from the case influenced Sarah's approach to subsequent investigations. She'd learned that cases involving powerful people and state secrets required careful navigation between professional duty and political pressure, but also that persistence and proper police work could expose even the most sophisticated conspiracies. The photograph that had started everything became a classified piece of evidence that few people would ever see. But its impact resonated through changes in security procedures, oversight of classified information access, and the prosecution of the most serious espionage cases in modern British history. Years later, Sarah would reflect on how a single abandoned car had led to exposing treason at the highest levels of government. The case had tested her skills as an investigator and her commitment to justice, but it had also demonstrated that individual courage and professional integrity could triumph over conspiracy and corruption. Mitchell's decision to document what he witnessed, despite the personal danger, had ultimately protected national security and brought justice to those who had betrayed their country for profit. His photograph had indeed been worth more than anyone's career. It had been worth preserving the integrity of British democracy itself. The secret that couldn't stay hidden had finally been exposed, not through grand intelligence operations or political maneuvering, but through the dedication of a royal guard who understood his duty and a detective inspector who refused to abandon a missing person case regardless of the powerful forces arrayed against her investigation. In the end, the truth had emerged through the combined efforts of people who placed their responsibility to serve above their personal safety, proving that even the most sophisticated conspiracies could be defeated by individuals willing to risk everything for justice. Sarah's determination to uncover the truth intensified after the threatening message. She knew that in cases involving powerful people, evidence had a tendency to disappear, and witnesses developed sudden memory problems. Speed was essential, but so was discretion. The forensic analysis of Mitchell's laptop provided the breakthrough she needed. Hidden in a folder disguised as military training materials, the computer contained copies of all the photographs from his camera, plus detailed notes about when and where each image was taken. Detective Constable Rachel Kim, the department's computer specialist, walked Sarah through the findings. Mitchell was very thorough, she explained, pulling up file after file. Every photograph is cataloged with date, time, location, and observations about the subjects. The level of detail was impressive and disturbing. Mitchell hadn't just been taking random surveillance photos. He'd been conducting a systematic investigation of his own. The notes revealed a pattern of meetings, relationships, and activities that painted a picture of corruption at the highest levels of government. Look at this sequence, Rachel continued, opening a folder labeled Project Verification. Mitchell documented the same group of people meeting at different locations over several weeks. Politicians, business leaders, and what appeared to be foreign nationals. Sarah studied the photographs carefully. The meetings were clearly intended to be private, back rooms of restaurants, country estates, private clubs where membership cost more than most people's annual salaries. The participants were men and women whose faces appeared regularly in newspapers and television news. Can you identify the foreign nationals? Rachel pulled up several enhanced images. We're running them through international databases, but preliminary results suggest diplomatic connections, possibly intelligence operatives from several different countries. This was worse than Sarah had feared. If Mitchell had documented meetings between British politicians and foreign intelligence agents, he'd stumbled onto something that transcended normal criminal activity. This was potentially treason, and that made his disappearance a matter of national security. The notes accompanying the photographs revealed Mitchell's growing concern about what he was witnessing. His entries became more detailed and urgent over time, suggesting he understood the significance of what he was documenting. One entry dated 3 weeks before his disappearance was particularly revealing. Confirmed exchange of documents between Minister Harrison and unidentified Eastern European contact. Payment discussed in terms suggesting ongoing arrangement. Need to verify currency amounts and frequency. Minister Harrison was the Deputy Defense Secretary, a man with access to classified military information and defense contracts worth billions of pounds. If he was selling information to foreign agents, the implications were staggering. Sarah realized she was dealing with a spy ring that had infiltrated the highest levels of government. Mitchell's photographs weren't just evidence of corruption. They were documentation of espionage that threatened national security. The investigation now required resources and authority beyond what a detective inspector could provide. Sarah needed help from people trained to handle cases involving state secrets and foreign intelligence. But she also knew that involving the security services might result in her being removed from the case entirely. Before making any calls to higher authorities, Sarah decided to pursue one more lead on her own. The photographs showed that several of the clandestine meetings had taken place at a private estate outside London, a property that appeared to serve as a regular gathering point for the conspirators. Research revealed that the estate belonged to Sir Marcus Whitfield, a businessman with interests in defense contracting and international trade. On the surface, Whitfield appeared to be a successful entrepreneur with legitimate connections to government officials. But his property was being used for meetings that participants clearly wanted to keep secret. Sarah decided to conduct surveillance of Whitfield's estate, hoping to either catch another meeting in progress or gather additional evidence about who was involved in the conspiracy. It was risky to proceed without backup, but she felt that time was running out for both Mitchell and herself. The estate was located in the Cotswolds, far enough from London to provide privacy, but close enough for convenient meetings. Sarah positioned herself in a wooded area overlooking the main house, using binoculars and a long-lens camera to monitor activity. For several hours, the estate appeared deserted except for groundskeeping staff. Sarah was beginning to think her surveillance would prove fruitless when a convoy of expensive cars began arriving in the early evening. The vehicles entered through a rear gate, avoiding the main driveway where visitors might be observed by passing traffic. Each car was driven directly into a large garage, preventing Sarah from identifying the passengers. But the coordinated arrival suggested a planned meeting of significant importance. Sarah documented the license plates of every vehicle and noted the timing of arrivals. If she couldn't identify the participants directly, she could at least trace the vehicles and work backwards to their owners. As darkness fell, Sarah noticed something that made her pulse quicken. One of the cars parked outside the garage was the same model and color as Lord Hampton's missing Bentley. She couldn't confirm it was the same vehicle from her position, but the coincidence was too significant to ignore. Her surveillance was interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. Sarah turned to find two men approaching through the woods, moving with the quiet confidence of professionals trained in fieldcraft. They were dressed in dark clothing and moved in a way that suggested military or intelligence background. Detective Inspector Chun, one of them said, his accent suggesting expensive education and government service. "You're going to need to come with us." Sarah's hand moved instinctively toward her radio, but the second man shook his head. "That won't be necessary. We're not here to harm you. But your presence here is compromising an ongoing operation." "What operation? And who are you?" The first man reached into his jacket and produced credentials identifying him as Agent Harrison from MI5. "We've been monitoring this estate for several months as part of a counterintelligence investigation. Your amateur surveillance is endangering both our operatives and yourself." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and frustration. If MI5 was involved, it meant the security services were aware of the conspiracy she'd uncovered. But it also meant she might be removed from the investigation just when she was making progress. "What about Guardsman Mitchell? Is he part of your operation?" Agent Harrison exchanged a glance with his partner before answering. "Mitchell was recruited to assist our investigation, but he exceeded his authority and compromised operational security. His disappearance is complicated." "Complicated how? Is he alive?" "We believe so, but he's no longer under our protection. The people you've been investigating discovered his connection to us and took steps to neutralize what they perceived as a threat." Sarah demanded more details, but Agent Harrison was reluctant to provide information about an ongoing intelligence operation. Instead, he insisted that she accompany them away from the estate and cease her independent investigation. "This is a matter of national security now," he explained as they walked back through the woods. "The Metropolitan Police doesn't have jurisdiction over counterintelligence operations. The Metropolitan Police has jurisdiction over missing persons and kidnapping," Sarah replied. "If Mitchell has been taken against his will, it's a criminal matter regardless of who's involved." The conversation continued as they reached the road where a government vehicle was waiting. Agent Harrison's position was clear. Sarah's investigation was interfering with a complex operation designed to expose and neutralize a spy ring that had been operating for years. Her amateur efforts were endangering both Mitchell and the operatives working to rescue him. Sarah's position was equally clear. Mitchell was a missing person who deserved police protection, and she wasn't convinced that the security services had his best interests at heart. Too many cases involving intelligence operations resulted in expendable assets being sacrificed for the greater good. The compromise they reached was uncomfortable but practical. Sarah would be briefed on the aspects of the operation that related to Mitchell's disappearance, and she would cease her independent investigation in exchange for regular updates on efforts to locate and rescue him. Agent Harrison's briefing revealed the scope of what Mitchell had uncovered. The spy ring included members of Parliament, senior civil servants, and military officers who had been selling classified information to multiple foreign governments. The operation had been active for at least 5 years and had compromised defense contracts, diplomatic initiatives, and intelligence operations. Mitchell was supposed to photograph meetings and identify participants, Agent Harrison explained. But he began conducting his own investigation and gathering evidence we hadn't authorized him to collect. Evidence like the photograph mentioned in the note found in the Bentley? Exactly. Mitchell captured something that definitively proves the conspiracy's existence and identifies its leadership. That photograph is now the key evidence in a case that could result in dozens of arrests and trials for treason. Sarah understood why powerful people would go to extreme lengths to prevent such evidence from becoming public. The photograph could destroy careers, topple governments, and send prominent figures to prison for life. Where is Mitchell now? Agent Harrison's expression darkened. We believe he's being held by the conspiracy's security apparatus. They're trying to force him to reveal where he hid the photograph and whether he made copies. And if he refuses to cooperate, then we're dealing with a murder investigation as well as espionage. The briefing continued for another hour, covering the history of the investigation and the challenges involved in exposing a conspiracy that included people with the power to interfere with both police work and intelligence operations. Sarah learned that the case had international implications, with allied governments providing intelligence about the foreign agents involved. Despite the official cooperation, Sarah remained skeptical about the security service's commitment to rescuing Mitchell. In her experience, intelligence operations prioritized mission success over individual lives, and Mitchell might be considered an acceptable loss if his rescue threatened the larger investigation. That night, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of the case. Rather than passive cooperation with MI5, she would continue her own investigation using the resources and authority of the Metropolitan Police. Mitchell deserved better than being treated as an expendable asset in someone else's operation. Her first step was analyzing the information she'd gathered independently, focusing on details that might have been overlooked by the intelligence services. The license plates she'd recorded at Whitfield's estate provided a starting point for identifying conspiracy members who might not be on MI5's radar. Detective Constable Kim's research into the vehicle registrations revealed several interesting connections. 3 of the cars were registered to shell companies with addresses that traced back to the same law firm. Another was registered to a diplomatic mission that officially had no connection to the countries whose agents were suspected of buying British secrets. More importantly, one of the vehicles was registered to Dr. Amanda Foster, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating trauma patients and maintaining confidentiality about sensitive cases. Her presence at the conspiracy meeting suggested that the group had access to professional services for managing problematic situations. Sarah suspected that Dr. Foster might be involved in keeping Mitchell compliant during his captivity. Psychiatric drugs and techniques could be used to disorient prisoners and make them more susceptible to interrogation. If Mitchell was being held against his will, a medical professional might be necessary to ensure his continued cooperation without leaving obvious evidence of physical abuse. Further investigation into Dr. Foster revealed that her practice included several high-profile clients who paid premium rates for absolute discretion. Her clinic was located in an isolated area outside London, the kind of place where unusual activities could occur without attracting attention from neighbors. Sarah decided that Dr. Foster's clinic warranted closer examination. If Mitchell was being held there, a police welfare check might provide the legal authority needed to enter the premises and search for him. The clinic was a converted Victorian mansion surrounded by high walls and extensive grounds. Security cameras monitored the entrance, and the building itself looked more like a private retreat than a medical facility. Everything about the location suggested that it was designed for maximum privacy and minimum public oversight. Sarah's approach to the clinic was carefully planned. She couldn't simply knock on the door and demand to search the premises without proper legal authority. But She could conduct a welfare check based on concerns about a missing person who might be receiving medical treatment there. The reception staff were polite but evasive when Sarah presented her credentials and explained her purpose. Dr. Foster was reportedly with a patient and unavailable for immediate consultation. However, the staff's nervous behavior and obvious efforts to delay her suggested that Sarah's arrival had created significant concern. While waiting in the reception area, Sarah observed details that reinforced her suspicions about the clinic's true purpose. The windows were reinforced with security glass, the doors required electronic card access, and the staff moved with the careful precision of people accustomed to managing dangerous or unpredictable situations. When Dr. Foster finally appeared, she was composed but visibly tense. She listened to Sarah's questions about Mitchell with professional detachment, but declined to confirm or deny whether he was receiving treatment at her facility. Patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing anyone who might be under our care, Dr. Foster explained. Even confirming or denying someone's presence here would violate medical ethics. Sarah understood the legal constraints, but pressed for any information that might help locate Mitchell. If someone was brought here against their will, that would be a criminal matter regardless of any medical considerations. All our patients are here voluntarily, Dr. Foster replied firmly. We specialize in treating individuals who require intensive therapeutic intervention for trauma and stress-related conditions. Many of our clients are referred by government agencies and require absolute confidentiality. The conversation continued for several minutes, but Dr. Foster provided no useful information about Mitchell's whereabouts. However, her defensive responses and obvious concern about Sarah's investigation suggested that the clinic was indeed involved in Mitchell's disappearance. Sarah's options were limited by the legal protections surrounding medical facilities and patient confidentiality. She needed either a warrant based on specific evidence or emergency circumstances that justified immediate action. Neither condition was clearly met based on her current investigation. As she prepared to leave the clinic, Sarah noticed something that changed her assessment of the situation. Through a partially open door, she glimpsed a man in military uniform sitting in what appeared to be a patient consultation room. The uniform was that of the Queen's Guard, and the figure matched Mitchell's general description. Sarah immediately demanded access to the patient, citing emergency circumstances and concern for his welfare. Dr. Foster's objections became more heated, and she insisted that any intervention would violate both medical ethics and patient rights. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Agent Harrison and his MI5 colleagues. They had apparently been monitoring Sarah's activities and arrived just as the situation was escalating beyond normal police procedures. Detective Inspector Chun, Agent Harrison said firmly, "You're interfering with an authorized intelligence operation. You need to step back immediately. I've seen Guardsman Mitchell in this facility. If he's being held against his will, it's a police matter. Mitchell is here voluntarily as part of his debriefing process. He's cooperating with our investigation and receiving appropriate medical support for the stress he's experienced." Sarah demanded to speak with Mitchell directly to confirm his status, but Agent Harrison refused. The situation had reached an impasse between police authority and intelligence operations, with Mitchell's welfare hanging in the balance. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Through the clinic's windows, Sarah could see movement in the grounds behind the building. Several figures were moving quickly through the gardens, apparently trying to avoid detection from inside the facility. Agent Harrison noticed the same movement and immediately spoke into his radio. "Perimeter teams, report status. Are those our people?" The response was clearly negative, because Agent Harrison's demeanor changed instantly from bureaucratic obstruction to urgent action. "We have unauthorized personnel on the grounds. This facility may be compromised." Sarah realized that while she and the MI5 team had been arguing about jurisdiction, other parties involved in the conspiracy had arrived at the clinic. Mitchell's presence there was apparently known to more than just the intelligence services, and someone else wanted to reach him first. The next few minutes were chaotic as security alarms began sounding throughout the clinic. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency to secure patient areas and implement emergency protocols. Dr. Foster disappeared entirely, apparently following predetermined procedures for dangerous situations. Agent Harrison and his team moved to intercept the intruders while Sarah remained inside to ensure Mitchell's safety. The man she had glimpsed earlier was indeed Mitchell, but he appeared to be under the influence of medication and only partially aware of his surroundings. "James," Sarah said, approaching him carefully. "I'm Detective Inspector Chun with the Metropolitan Police. Are you here voluntarily?" Mitchell looked at her with confusion and obvious difficulty focusing. His speech was slurred when he attempted to respond, suggesting he was heavily sedated. Whatever medical treatment he was receiving, it was affecting his ability to think clearly or make informed decisions about his situation. Sarah helped Mitchell to his feet and began moving him toward what she hoped was a secure exit from the clinic. The sounds of conflict from the grounds suggested that the confrontation between MI5 and the intruders was escalating beyond a simple standoff. As they moved through the clinic's corridors, Sarah began to understand the facility's true purpose. Behind the medical facade, it was clearly designed for holding and interrogating people who couldn't be processed through normal channels. The patients weren't receiving therapy, they were being managed and controlled by professionals who specialized in extracting information without leaving obvious evidence. Mitchell's condition improved slightly as they walked, suggesting that the medications in his system were beginning to wear off. He started to recognize Sarah as a police officer and began trying to communicate about his situation. "The photograph," he mumbled through the sedative haze. "They want the photograph. But I hid it. They can't find it. Where did you hide it, James?" "Safe place. Secret place. Only I know." Sarah realized that Mitchell's value to both sides of the conspiracy lay in his knowledge of where he'd hidden the crucial evidence. The photograph he'd taken was apparently so damaging that multiple parties were willing to risk exposed operations and criminal charges to obtain it. The exit from the clinic was blocked by men wearing tactical gear and carrying weapons that were definitely not standard police equipment. Sarah quickly retreated deeper into the building, looking for alternative exits while trying to keep Mitchell mobile despite his impaired condition. The clinic's layout was more complex than it appeared from outside, with multiple levels and interconnected wings that suggested it had been significantly modified from its original Victorian design. Sarah found herself navigating a maze of corridors and secure doors while the sounds of conflict echoed from multiple directions. A fire alarm began sounding, adding to the chaos and confusion. Emergency lighting activated, casting strange shadows that made navigation even more difficult. Sarah couldn't tell whether the alarm was triggered by actual fire or as part of the facility's security protocols. Mitchell's condition continued to improve as they moved, and he began providing more coherent information about his situation. "They've been drugging me for days," he explained, "trying to make me talk about the operation and the evidence I collected." "Who are they?" "Dr. Foster and her staff." "Foster works for them, but she's not in charge. There's someone else. Someone who gives orders to the politicians I was photographing." Sarah understood that Mitchell had discovered not just a spy ring, but a larger conspiracy with its own command structure. The people buying British secrets weren't just foreign agents. They were part of an organization with the resources and connections to compromise high-level government officials. Finding an exit from the clinic required avoiding both the tactical teams that had entered the building and any MI5 personnel who might try to reclaim Mitchell for their own purposes. Sarah wasn't certain who she could trust, and her priority was getting Mitchell to safety where he could receive proper medical attention and legal protection. The photograph that had started everything remained hidden in a location known only to Mitchell. Until it was recovered and its contents revealed, the conspiracy would continue operating and Mitchell would remain a target for elimination. Sarah's investigation had evolved from a missing person case into a race to expose treason before the evidence could be destroyed and the witnesses silenced forever. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun had seen many strange cases during her 15 years with the Metropolitan Police, but nothing quite like this. The call came in at 3:47 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday morning in November 2019. A luxury Bentley Continental GT had been found abandoned on the banks of the River Thames, its engine still warm, driver's door hanging open like a mouth frozen in surprise. What made this case unusual wasn't just the expensive car or its mysterious abandonment. It was the single item found in the passenger seat, a ceremonial sword belonging to the Queen's Guard, its blade reflecting the streetlights like a silver question mark against the black leather interior. Sarah pulled her coat tighter as she approached the scene. The Thames lapped quietly against the embankment, carrying with it the usual city smells of diesel and dampness. Crime scene technicians had already cordoned off the area with their familiar yellow tape, creating a small island of activity in the otherwise empty riverside. "What do we know so far?" Sarah asked Sergeant Michael Roberts, her longtime partner, who was already examining the vehicle with his characteristic methodical approach. "Bentley's registered to Lord Hampton's estate," Michael replied, consulting his notebook. "But here's the interesting part. Lord Hampton is currently in Scotland at his hunting lodge. Has been for the past week, according to his staff." Sarah nodded, filing away this information. Lord Hampton was a prominent member of Parliament and close friend to several senior royals. His involvement, even peripherally, meant this case would attract attention from places she'd rather avoid. And the sword? That's where things get really interesting. Michael led her closer to the vehicle. According to the markings, it belongs to Guardsman James Mitchell, 26 years old, served with distinction for 4 years. Assigned to Windsor Castle. The pieces were beginning to form a puzzle, but Sarah couldn't see the full picture yet. A missing lord's car, an abandoned guard's sword, and a location that suggested either a meeting gone wrong or a desperate escape. "Have we contacted Guardsman Mitchell?" "That's just it," Michael said, lowering his voice. "Mitchell didn't report for duty yesterday morning. First time in 4 years he's missed a shift without explanation." Sarah felt the familiar tingle that came with sensing a case was more complex than it initially appeared. In her experience, when members of the royal household went missing, it usually meant someone was trying very hard to keep something quiet. The forensics team was thorough in their examination of the Bentley. Every surface was dusted for prints, every fiber collected for analysis. Sarah watched them work while her mind processed the limited information they had. The car showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no obvious damage. Whatever had happened here, it had been either very clean or very planned. Dr. Emily Watson, the lead forensics officer, approached Sarah with preliminary findings. "The car's been wiped down," she reported. "But whoever did it missed a few spots. We've got partial prints on the door handle and what looks like a complete set on the sword hilt. Mitchell's prints. We'll know soon enough. But there's something else." Dr. Watson led Sarah to the rear of the vehicle. "Take a look at this." The trunk was empty except for a small piece of paper wedged into the corner where the carpet met the side panel. It was clearly placed there deliberately, visible enough to be found but hidden enough to avoid casual notice. Sarah carefully extracted the paper using tweezers. It was expensive stationery, cream-colored with a subtle watermark. Written in precise handwriting were just 4 words. "The photograph still exists." Cryptic, Michael observed. "But it suggests this whole thing revolves around some kind of evidence." Sarah agreed. In her experience, photographs that made people abandon expensive cars and ceremonial swords were usually the kind that could destroy reputations or topple governments. The royal connection only reinforced this theory. The investigation's next phase required delicate navigation. Sarah knew that any inquiry involving the royal household would be monitored by people whose job it was to protect both the monarchy's interests and national security. She needed to be thorough but discreet, professional but not threatening to powerful people who preferred their business conducted in shadows. Her first stop was Windsor Castle. The ancient fortress sat like a stone guardian over the Thames Valley, its towers and battlements speaking of centuries of secrets kept and revealed. Sarah had visited once as a tourist years ago, but approaching as a police investigator felt entirely different. The security checkpoint was more thorough than she'd expected. Even with her credentials and advance appointment, Sarah found herself subjected to multiple identity checks and brief interrogations about the nature of her visit. The message was clear. This was a place where access was controlled and information was precious. Captain William Thornberry, the officer responsible for the guard units, met Sarah in a wood-paneled office that smelled of leather and old books. He was exactly what she'd expected from a senior military officer, tall, precise, and speaking in the clipped accent that suggested expensive education and military training. Guardsman Mitchell is an exemplary soldier. Captain Thornberry began before Sarah could ask her first question. For years of flawless service. Never late, never absent without permission, never involved in any incidents or controversies. Until yesterday, Sarah pointed out. Yes, until yesterday. Captain Thornberry's expression remained neutral, but Sarah detected the slight tension that suggested he was choosing his words carefully. His absence is unprecedented and completely out of character. Sarah consulted her notes. When did you last see Guardsman Mitchell? 3 days ago, during the evening briefing. He was scheduled for duties at Buckingham Palace the following day, then Windsor Castle duty yesterday morning. He completed the Buckingham Palace assignment without incident. And between then and his missed shift, officially he was off duty. Guards are entitled to personal time between assignments. Captain Thornberry paused. However, I should mention that Mitchell had requested a private meeting with me for yesterday afternoon. He said it concerned a matter of personal security. This was the first indication that Mitchell might have been aware of whatever situation led to his disappearance. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Did he give any details about this security concern? None. He simply said he needed to discuss something confidential that related to his duties. Captain Thornberry's professional demeanor flickered for just a moment. Inspector, I hope you understand that guardsmen sometimes become aware of information that requires careful handling. Part of their training involves knowing when to seek guidance rather than act independently. Sarah understood the implication. Royal Guards saw and heard things that weren't meant for public consumption. If Mitchell had stumbled onto something sensitive, his disappearance might be less mysterious and more strategic. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but Captain Thornberry provided little additional information. Either he genuinely knew nothing more, or he was under orders to limit what he shared with the police. Sarah suspected the latter, but couldn't prove it. Her next step was investigating Mitchell's personal life. The address on file led her to a modest flat in Woolwich, the area where many military personnel stationed in London chose to live. The building was clean but unremarkable, the kind of place that housed people who spent most of their time elsewhere. Mitchell's landlord, Mrs. Patricia Evans, was a widow in her 60s who clearly took pride in knowing her tenant's business. She met Sarah at the building's entrance, keys in hand, and curiosity written across her face. James is a lovely boy, Mrs. Evans said as she led Sarah up the narrow staircase. Quiet, polite, always pays his rent on time. Military boys usually are good tenants, in my experience. The flat was small but meticulously maintained. Everything had its place, from the precisely folded towels in the bathroom to the books arranged by height on a single shelf. It was the home of someone accustomed to military discipline and inspection. Has he seemed worried about anything recently? Sarah asked while examining the living area. Well, now that you mention it, he did seem a bit distracted the last few weeks. Usually, James would stop for a chat when he picked up his mail, but lately, he's been more hurried, I suppose. Sarah found this interesting. People changed their routines when they were under pressure or trying to avoid something. Did you notice any unusual visitors? Phone calls. No visitors that I saw, but there were more phone calls than usual. I could hear his mobile ringing at all hours, even late at night. James is usually very considerate about noise, so I assumed it must be important. A systematic search of the flat revealed little of immediate use. Mitchell's personal belongings were minimal: a few civilian clothes, some military manuals, a laptop that would need forensic examination. But Sarah did find one item that didn't fit the pattern of a simple military life. Hidden behind a row of books was a small digital camera, expensive and professional grade. It was the kind of equipment used by serious photographers or people who needed to document things with absolute clarity. For a guardsman living on military pay, it represented a significant investment. Sarah carefully bagged the camera for evidence. Whatever Mitchell had been photographing might be connected to the cryptic note found in the Bentley. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was still incomplete. Mrs. Evans proved to be an observant neighbor. She mentioned that Mitchell had received several packages over the past month, all delivered by courier rather than regular post. This was unusual enough that she'd noticed, especially since Mitchell typically received very little mail. Were these packages large? Small, small, but heavy. The delivery man always seemed to struggle with them more than their size would suggest. Mrs. Evans paused thoughtfully, and James always signed for them personally. Usually, if tenants aren't home, they'll let me sign, but these couriers specifically asked for James. Sarah made notes about the packages. Heavy, small deliveries that required personal signatures suggested either valuable items or sensitive materials. Combined with the expensive camera, it painted a picture of Mitchell involved in some kind of documentation or surveillance activity. The forensic examination of Mitchell's laptop would take time, but Sarah hoped it might provide crucial insights into his activities and contacts. Meanwhile, she needed to follow up on the Bentley's connection to Lord Hampton. Lord Hampton's London residence was a Georgian townhouse in Belgravia, the kind of property that cost millions and spoke of old money and older power. The staff who answered Sarah's inquiry were polite but protective, clearly trained to deflect questions while appearing helpful. The head butler, Mr. Geoffrey Carlyle, was a man who had perfected the art of saying nothing while speaking extensively. Lord Hampton is indeed in Scotland, he confirmed. He departed last Tuesday for his annual shooting holiday. The Bentley remained here in London for the use of staff as needed. Which staff members have access to the vehicle? Several, Inspector. The keys are kept in the household office for use by senior staff when running errands for the estate. It's quite common for the car to be used when the family is away. Sarah pressed for specifics, but Mr. Carlyle's answers became increasingly vague. Either the household security was remarkably lax, or someone was being deliberately evasive about who might have taken the car. A conversation with the estate's driver, Thomas Reed, proved more illuminating. Reed was a practical man who spoke directly and seemed less concerned with protecting the household's reputation than with understanding what had happened to a vehicle he considered his responsibility. The Bentley was here Sunday evening when I left, Reed told Sarah. Monday was my day off, but I came by Tuesday morning to check on the cars. That's when I noticed it was missing. Did you report it stolen? Well, that's just it. I thought one of the staff had taken it for estate business. It's happened before. I was going to ask Mr. Carlyle, but then the police called saying it had been found. Reed's timeline was helpful. It meant the car had been taken sometime between Sunday evening and Tuesday morning, a narrow window that might help identify who had access during those hours. Did you notice anything unusual around the estate recently? Any strangers? Any changes in routine? Reed considered this carefully. There was something odd last week. Lord Hampton had a visitor late one evening, just before he left for Scotland. Very discreet meeting, not on the official calendar. The gentleman arrived in a taxi and left the same way. Didn't want his car to be seen in our courtyard. Can you describe this visitor? Tall, well-dressed, probably military bearing. He carried himself like someone used to command. The meeting lasted about an hour, and Lord Hampton seemed quite serious afterwards. This information connected several threads. A secretive meeting, Lord Hampton's immediate departure for Scotland, and now his car being used for whatever situation had led to Mitchell's disappearance. Sarah was beginning to see the outline of a conspiracy, but she still needed more evidence to understand its scope. The forensic analysis of the camera found in Mitchell's flat provided the next breakthrough. The device contained hundreds of photographs, taken over several weeks, all focused on various locations around London where senior political and royal figures conducted business. The photographs were professionally composed and technically excellent, showing Mitchell had considerable skill with the camera. More importantly, they showed careful surveillance of sensitive locations, the rear entrances to government buildings, private meeting locations, and several sites where powerful people might expect privacy. Dr. Watson called Sarah with the preliminary findings. These aren't tourist snapshots, she reported. This is systematic surveillance photography. Someone trained Mitchell well, or he had natural talent for this kind of work. Any photographs of people? That's where it gets interesting. Most of the photos show locations and vehicles, but there are a few that capture individuals. We're running facial recognition, but I can tell you that several of these people are recognizable public figures. Sarah felt the familiar tension that came with realizing a case was larger than it initially appeared. Surveillance photography of senior political figures suggested either intelligence work or blackmail preparation. Either possibility meant she was dealing with forces beyond normal police jurisdiction. The investigation was reaching a point where Sarah needed to make careful decisions about how to proceed. Cases involving the royal household and senior politicians required delicate handling, especially when evidence suggested systematic surveillance and missing persons. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop looking or join Mitchell. The photograph is worth more than your career." Sarah stared at the message, feeling the cold certainty that her investigation had attracted attention from people who preferred to operate in shadows. The threat was clear, but not specific, which made it more rather than less intimidating. She immediately contacted her supervisor, Chief Inspector David Morrison, who listened to her summary with growing concern. Morrison had dealt with sensitive cases before and understood the politics involved when investigations touched powerful people. "We need to be very careful how we handle this," Morrison warned. "If Mitchell was involved in surveillance of senior figures, there are protocols to follow. This might not be a simple missing person case." "Are you suggesting we back down?" "I'm suggesting we make sure we have proper authorization before we dig deeper. The last thing the Metropolitan Police needs is a confrontation with intelligence services over jurisdiction." Sarah understood the caution, but felt frustrated by the political considerations. Mitchell was still missing, and someone was threatening to make her disappear as well. From her perspective, that made it a legitimate police matter regardless of who else might be involved. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Evans called Sarah that evening with new information. "I've been thinking about those packages James received," she said. "I remembered something else. The last delivery came with instructions that James should call a number when he received it." "Did you hear the conversation?" "Just bits and pieces. But I did hear James say something about being ready to deliver and asking about payment arrangements." This suggested Mitchell had been working for someone, possibly providing the surveillance photographs in exchange for money. It also meant there might be a record of communications between Mitchell and whoever had hired him. Sarah decided to proceed with the investigation despite the political sensitivities. The threat against her only reinforced her conviction that something serious was being covered up, and her responsibility as a police officer was to uncover the truth. The next morning brought another development. The forensic team had found additional evidence in the Bentley, trace amounts of a sedative that suggested someone had been drugged before being moved. If Mitchell had been forced to abandon the car, it implied his disappearance was involuntary rather than strategic. Dr. Watson's analysis was thorough. "The residue was found on the driver's seat and steering wheel," she reported. "Whoever was driving had been exposed to a fast-acting sedative, probably administered without their knowledge. Enough to cause unconsciousness. Potentially. This particular compound is known for causing disorientation and memory loss even in small doses. Someone could have been drugged, driven to the Thames location, and then removed from the scene while barely conscious." Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place. Mitchell had been conducting surveillance work, possibly documenting something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. When he became a threat, someone had drugged him and staged his disappearance to look voluntary. The photograph mentioned in the note was key to everything. Whatever Mitchell had captured on camera was valuable enough to justify kidnapping a member of the Queen's Guard and abandoning an expensive vehicle. Sarah's investigation had reached the point where she needed to understand what Mitchell had photographed and who was willing to go to such lengths to suppress it. The answers would determine whether this was a case of espionage, blackmail, or something even more serious. The warning she'd received suggested that powerful people were watching her investigation and prepared to take action if she got too close to the truth. But Sarah had spent 15 years learning that backing down from threats only encouraged more serious ones. As she prepared for the next phase of the investigation, Sarah knew she was walking into dangerous territory. The combination of royal connections, political figures, and systematic surveillance suggested a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of British society. Whatever photograph Mitchell had taken was worth kidnapping for, and someone believed it was also worth killing for. Sarah's job was to find both the photograph and Mitchell before the people responsible decided that eliminating a police detective was an acceptable risk.